Welcome to the Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn. I'm Artem Smith, creator of this audiocast series. I've been an entrepreneur, investment banker, and board leader for 25 years. Thank you for the registrants for this event today. The episode will be recorded and released in the coming weeks. Family business is a passion of mine, having grown up in a family of entrepreneurs and engaged in a wide range of dialogues and businesses with fascinating family enterprises around the globe for 2 decades. I founded the Family Business Audiocast to provide a valuable platform for listeners to hear from veterans, academics, and leaders in family-owned enterprises and family offices. Whether you're a seasoned family business leader or billionaire or building a family office, these conversations are meant to be enlightening. Today, we have a special episode focusing on the family office and the family firm, with a particular emphasis on the entrepreneurial elements of the family company and some of the academic structures and governance and the operational mechanisms to make a family firm successful. Family business is a subject close to my heart, and I'm excited to delve into these topics with our esteemed guest today. Today, we welcome Professor Matt Hughes. Matt, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's a real pleasure to be joining you on this audiocast.
So a bit about Matt. You can find Matt on LinkedIn as well as at the University of Leicester in UK. He's a Schultz Distinguished Professor of Family Business and a Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the university. His expertise lies in the strategy and management of entrepreneurship and innovation with a special focus on family firms. Matt is an award-winning teacher, researcher, practitioner, and doctoral supervisor. He also hosts the Professor Matt Hughes podcast, successful podcast series in its own right, and he's worked as an advisor to many businesses and organizations globally, large and small, over 20 years. He's also the associate editor of the Journal of Family Business Strategy and also the senior editor of the leading family business information website, familybusiness.org. We're thrilled to have him here today. Matt, let's dive into the conversation. First of all, tell us about you and your professor role at the university.
Great, yeah, thank you very much, Adam. It's been a really interesting journey for me. My family have got a background of being entrepreneurs and having family businesses. And to be honest, the whole, the classic story of my father being made redundant and then taking that redundancy money and starting his own business really changed everything for our family. And threw in my mum, who was doing all the accounts and things, and my dad was working construction with an interest in like artisan building and historical construction and things. And that kind of drew in me and my twin brother, but at the same time, he always told us, don't go into the family business. not because of any stresses, but more because of the physical toll that construction takes. So right. I did the next best thing and decided I would like to study entrepreneurship. And over time, this took me into family business. And my role as things stand is I'm Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been really deep diving into my passion for family businesses and trying to understand how they function, how they survive, how they are so resilient and innovative over time, despite a body of research suggesting to us that they are perhaps quite conservative in their actions, and therefore trying to understand that kind of paradox between how do they manage their legacy and their history and what makes them innovative and so powerful going forward.
That's wonderful. In some of the previous audiocasts, we've spoken with some leaders that really hone in on the sustainability of the organization and to find a way to continue that legacy. But at the same time, there are some challenges in these private companies in terms of operational excellence and compensation and governance and succession planning. So also you are editor at the Journal of Family Business Strategy. What is that about?
Well, Journal of Family Business Strategy is one of the premier journals dedicated to family business research. We take great pride in not just providing the latest and groundbreaking research, but also making sure that that research is very applicable to family owners, family advisors, family managers. And so the journal itself is hosted by Elsevier, and the editor-in-chief is Thorsten Pieper from University of North Carolina in Charlotte. And there's a good team of associate editors, and I'm one of them, and we make sure that we try to draw in the best research, make sure that it's rigorous and well thought through, and by the same time has real meaning, a real practical relevance to the community.
That's wonderful. I've been reading some of those articles the last couple of years. It's quite a terrific journal. So moving on to the family firm ecosystem. So maybe everybody knows the family office market is expanding and that there are thousands of family-owned firms. But perhaps, given your focus on innovation and entrepreneurship, maybe start talking about the importance of the corporate ownership and governance and stewardship of the firm, and then we'll move into the next gen element of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. It's something I've been researching actively in recent years. It actually started with a study that we did for the Institute of Family Business in the UK, where they were very interested in understanding the relationship between corporate governance and the entrepreneurship and innovation of the family business. In our study, the UK is a bit different because we also not only have family offices and family councils, but we also have family trusts that are allowed into the legal structure. But what is interesting is how important it is to have that kind of a mixture of both family and external oversight on the core family management team, especially in terms of heading off some of its natural tendencies to pull in a particular trajectory. So for instance, in one of our studies where we looked at the relationship between corporate governance and innovation strategy, what we tended to find was that family businesses would put most of their emphasis on operational excellence, or what can be broadly described as an exploitative innovation strategy. Not exploitative in the negative sense, more in terms of exploiting the existing capabilities, competencies, products and services of the business. So it's relatively low risk. The safety and the returns of it are fairly well established, but it does become path dependent. And so that explains a lot about why we've learned over the years that family firms don't necessarily innovate, even though they've got the resources and the capabilities to do so. And this brings us to this challenge of willingness and ability. So the family firm often has the ability to innovate, but not necessarily the willingness. And this is where corporate governance can specifically come in, because it can start to change the thought processes among senior managers, or among family owners and managers, and help therefore unlock more explorative innovation strategies. They're especially needed if the business needs to change course or needs to overcome a legacy of underperformance, for instance, and move in a particular trajectory. As it happens, in our research, one of the most critical factors that we found for enabling that switch in innovation strategy because of corporate governance happened by involving the next generation family members in the business's decision-making and strategizing, because that led new ideas to fold into the strategy process and help kickstart that change.
Right. Well, the next generation can be G2, G3, G4, and as we've seen from the research from Camden and experts like Ron Diamond and Christina Wing that we've had on the audiocast, there is a diminishing return of continuity as you go through the generations. Sometimes there's change that is premeditated to retain the business. Let's say in the case of LVMH is a good example, or in the US, we have the Pritzker family, we have Dot Foods. There's lots of businesses that continue through the second or third generation. But back to this point about next gen and founder transitions, you and I were talking about the importance of experience. and not just desire to remain in the family business for wealth
Yes.
or ego purposes. So maybe talk a bit about the experience of the family members and how you've seen successful evolutions from the G1.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think one of the points I'll just quickly pick up on there is the concept of diminishing elements over time in terms of both the willingness and desire of the next generation members to continue to be involved. But equally, one of the things that we've come across now, very, very recent research, is the idea that not each generation, in fact, contributes equally valuable new resources that are beneficial to the family business. So, for instance, in one of our studies of among Chinese family businesses, one of the things that we found is that the most valuable new resources come in the first and then second generation. But as we enter the third generation, they offer fewer valuable resources in terms of helping, for example, the family business capitalize on innovation ideas and being able to turn that into wealth. So I think that is another interesting element there is to what extent does the family ask itself, well, who is best placed to take on and lead the business? In fact, as we are literally speaking, in the UK, there's a very famous family business in the area in Leicester, where I live and work, Wilkinson's. They've recently gone into administration, and it looks like it's going to result in the closure of 400 out of their 450 retail stores. And it has been really interesting watching that, how the family seems to have become disassociated from the running of the business and disassociated from the maintaining and sustaining that business. In fact, they've been almost silent in the process of this administration. And that is the business is now 90 years old and I think in its third generation, as far as I can remember. But it does signal to the fact about the desire of the next generation, but also thinking more appropriately about what resources do they bring in terms of knowledge, networks, capacity, and ideas that will actually be beneficial to the family business, or should that be traded against professionalization, for instance?
Well, there's also the personal interests of the owners, right? That there's not a correlation or consistency between the continuity of the company and the actual personal interests of the successor generation. So there can be a difference of opinion there. But where do you think the next generations get their most experience? Is it a combination of business schools, or is it outside boards, or going to, like, say, a McKinsey or something like that? Or how do you look at the attribution of entrepreneurship knowledge and value add within the organization in terms of internal versus external knowledge?
From at least from an educational viewpoint, one of the things that I've realized over the years, I've headed up postgraduate programs in entrepreneurship and innovation, and they consistently draw a high number of students that come from family business backgrounds. And more often than not, it's part of a deliberate strategy of educational upskilling to a certain extent, in terms of increasing their educational attainment against perhaps what was not available or not an option to some of the previous generations of the business. In some ways, that is a case of expanding that human capital, expanding the worldview almost, because especially if they travel abroad for education, which in the case of the students that I taught, that was very much the case. It was a mixture of both the education and also the overseas experience. Part of it was strategic, because the family businesses in question had some ideas of expanding internationally. So, for example, some of my students were from Indian family businesses that ran either textile businesses or refrigeration businesses or white goods businesses. And they were, on the one hand, getting education, but also on the other hand, experiencing and understanding the markets that they were considering to expand into. The other aspect of this that I would like to flag up is, and this is a subject that came up in an interview I did recently with Mira Blumenbach. So she's a professor in the Netherlands, but has been with her family business for generations. And what was interesting in speaking to her was how, even at a very early age, the parenting style of parents can in fact directly affect whether or not a successor from the next generation is even plausible. So for instance, in Mira's case, her and her brother were discussed as part of the next generation succession, but it was never really intended to hand over to Mira, for instance. It was much more of to the son or to the brother. So that has a direct effect, because it started to reshape her thinking about, well, does she want to stay in the family business? And so there is a biasing risk. Some very recent articles we have on familybusiness.org talks about helicopter parenting and how that excess level of oversight can in fact work against the founder's desire to keep the business within family control, because it can start to change the preferences and ambitions of the next generation.
Yeah, there's always that tug of war between cash today and cash tomorrow, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So with if we pick up on that point, is one of the key areas of research around family business has been around the idea of social emotional wealth. It's that concept that the family business doesn't just value the wealth and the financial wealth of the business creates, but in fact values very deeply the opportunities the family business creates for maintaining control and legacy, maintaining family ties and family bonds, and being able to pass the business on to the next generation. When those conditions become destabilized, the fear that comes along with that can again change behavior in terms of activating innovation behavior, for example, or activating more profound search for a successor, be that within the family or beyond the family. So these are other, I would say, critical elements based on it also really stems from the dynamic between the current generation and the next generation, and where they see the transition of the business going.
Right. So the emotional connection to the business, to these family firms that allow for that continuity, as opposed to selling the business, like in my case, very often working on acquiring or selling these private companies. That impetus comes from usually not a consensus point of view, but really the decision makers, the G1 or the G2, sometimes looking to sell, and the next generation doesn't want to sell, or the reverse, where the next generation doesn't want to run the business and maintain a legacy, and really pushes the family to let the business go and move on for a monetization event. But what are you seeing about philanthropy as an important element of integrating into these businesses, to maybe make the social fabric more sticky for the later generations?
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting point. I think the point about philanthropy, I believe, is also related to the issue of emotions and the concept of emotional attachment, because the more emotionally attached the family members are to the family business, then the more that they will identify themselves as individuals directly with the business, and therefore it becomes highly aligned in that sense. So on the one hand, we have that emotional connection, but in terms of philanthropy, I think that is extremely important, because one of the trends that we are very much seeing in not just in research now, but also as we look at family businesses over time and as they start to enter these succession moments, is that there are differences, not between generations in terms of between baby boomers and millennials and Generation X and so on and so forth. And each of them have a different set of values. They've been brought up in a different type of society with a different type of education system, with a different type of world that emphasizes different types of messages to them.
Right.
And as a direct consequence of that, what we see is that these different generations have a very different how can I say, mindset as to what they consider to be important. So I think philanthropic efforts, for example, are absolutely very important for modern day generations who will be perhaps the next in line to inherit a family business. For instance, just for the sake of example, if I just think of my own son, and he's currently in high school, there has been a direct education, for example, on things like climate change. So because of that, he is already highly sensitized to that, and it's affecting his behavior, his values. And so when this occurs in the family business, we see these clash of generations, and this can cause tension in between whether or not there is an alignment between the current generation and future generation and what that may mean for the business.
Got it. So maybe give us some examples of the best philanthropic structures you've seen for these larger family firms. Are they setting up a charitable structure for the whole company, or is there a separate arm, or are there specific personal interests, maybe passion interests that are set up by the next generation? What are charitable philanthropic initiatives that seem to be the most effective?
From what I've seen, it's very much a mix. Some family businesses, for instance, will open a philanthropic arm, so to speak, to the family business, which then goes and makes investments in, it might be in the local community, for instance, or in the region, or even in causes, but whatever it is that the family business is particularly passionate about. Increasingly, I think, especially those run by more recently established family businesses, or the ones that are very much in current generation control, then I think, again, what we see is an alignment between what are the causes that they are interested in and how those align with the values that the business wants to espouse going forward. So on the one hand, it's a direct consequence of the pressure of ESG, so, environmental, social, and governance goals that are being placed on firms. This can obviously come from outside stakeholders, but in the UK, for instance, there is a clear trajectory for businesses to adopt ESG audits or environmental audits and sustainability audits, where they're going to have to evidence how they meet certain environmental sustainability and social goals. So I think that's one element. The other element I have seen is where family businesses decide, okay, we are now stepping back from a trading enterprise to become more of an investment-driven business. So again, this is where the family offices will certainly be involved, but that can both involve a corporate investment type arm as well as a philanthropic investment type arm. So I would say there isn't a set solution to this, but rather it depends on whether or not the business sees itself as, or the family sees itself as wanting to be a going concern or to move away from its current businesses and more specifically into investing and philanthropy.
Okay, great. So back to scale, there's a significant expansion of, especially the last couple of years, in the aggregation of wealth into multifamily offices, especially looking at some of the bigger names like BDT is been quite successful with Byron Trott and merging with other businesses. And then we see some aggregations going on within the family business and some of our clients and friends. So it'd be interesting. We've seen lots of data and concern from some of the research from Harvard and also Ron Diamond and others about compensation. So when you think about the scalability of the bigger family firms, it seems like there's a opportunity to really scale some of these firms combined and to take a more modern approach to compensation. What are you seeing on that front happening now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's one distinction that I feel that is important to make. One is the distinction between the ownership and the legal structure of the family business. So that is whether or not it's a publicly listed family business or whether it's an entirely privately owned family business. And mainly because the market itself will impose a certain level of professionalization on the publicly listed family business, even though it has a wriggle room on maintaining family control. In the private family-owned family business, that's a different story because the owners and managers have much more direct control, and therefore that creates more variability and professionalization. So if we take that down to the issue of compensation, then for me, really, it's the alignment of interest between family members and non-family employees. That for me is probably the most critical compensation question, because in the most recent years, we've heard this terminology called the bifurcation bias, the tendency that family businesses will, whether deliberately or unconsciously, will tend to treat their family members different from their non-family employees. And that affects all manner of things, from organizational justice to decision rights to reward structures. The one thing I would say with compensation frameworks is that they typically achieve two things, or at least are intended to achieve two things. One is reward behavior in a past sense, in terms of reward behavior over the past, say, 12 months, but also is to incentivize forward-looking behavior. And so compensation frameworks really have a third layer, which is signaling, in the sense that whatever is compensated, whatever is measured, is ultimately what is deemed important to the employee. That's going to be the ultimate measure. And so for that reason, compensation frameworks carry significant signaling effects, both to employees and into subsequent markets, not just the labor market. And so in a family business, that has a more direct and perhaps more acute implication, precisely because of this distinguishment that we tend to see between the way the family and non-family employees are often treated.
Interesting. I think perhaps in a separate conversation, and there's obviously observers on the call that are in ESOPs or accounting or consulting family businesses or lawyers. So the equity structures and the compensation structures are very interesting, not just from a governance perspective, but also in terms of incentives and fairness and the ability for the family firm to survive and not just sell out in a weak moment. Moving on to some of your research, you have this noted in the article in the Sage journal recently, talking about the entrepreneurial capabilities of a private firm, of a family firm, that there's kind of winners and losers, and that there's some correlation you found of firms that are, I guess, set up operationally properly as an entrepreneurial firm, whether it be cultural or operational structures, that if a firm is not set up with its entrepreneurial fabric, that it will have a very hard time pivoting into becoming an entrepreneurship firm. You call that operational entropy, and you did a paper on that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you. This is a paper published in the Sage Journal, Entrepreneurship Theory and Practice, and it's a really interesting bit of research, really, because we tracked a large number of US publicly listed firms over a nearly 20-year period, if I remember correctly, using data from CompuStat. And what we were interested in discovering is that how beneficial is it to be entrepreneurial? And by entrepreneurial, I mean really entrepreneurial. So really investing in breakthrough innovation, experimenting, focusing on discovery and channeling the activities of the business around making breakthroughs. And this speaks to the idea of the company being highly entrepreneurially oriented. And for the longest time, we've been of a pretty strong belief in the field that the more entrepreneurially oriented the business is, the more likely it is to succeed, is going to be high performing and highly profitable. The problem is that a lot of our research suffers from survivor bias, in the sense that we only measure those firms that are still succeeding and still doing well. We forget about those that have failed. There is a cross-sectional bias to most studies. So what we looked at in this paper was we started to ask ourselves, what does the highly entrepreneurially oriented business actually look like? And what we ideated, I guess, was the idea that the highly entrepreneurially oriented firm is just unencumbered. It's focused on breakthrough innovation, not operational excellence. It's focused on making new discoveries, not defining what is already, let's say, the revenue streams and the revenue sources of the firm. And because of this, it can get trapped in failure traps, where the failure to make one breakthrough that will then bring in the revenue to fund its other breakthrough innovation activities can create this cycle in which the business exhausts its resources quickly and aggressively. And this is the phenomenon that we described as entrepreneurial entropy. So a concept neatly borrowed from physics. I should say that if it wasn't for my physics teacher, I would not have gone to university and I wouldn't be speaking with you today. So I owe a lot to my physics teacher, but he made me super passionate about how we can learn from physics. And this is precisely what the paper is about. So the highly entrepreneurial firm will exhaust resources quite aggressively, which increases the risk of firm failure. So as you were saying, that means we have to counterbalance this by making sure that we have good strategic processes, good management processes in place to handle our entrepreneurial efforts and our entrepreneurial tendencies. And make sure, for instance, by way of a quick example, that bad entrepreneurial initiatives are quickly discarded and aren't allowed to fester and develop and therefore waste even more resources. The catch, though, and I think this is one of the key takeaways I'd like to make, is that, and this is very salient for family businesses, is that those companies that try to make a fast switch from being conservative, being cautious, to being much more entrepreneurial suffered the most. They were at a considerably higher rate of risk of failure than the other businesses that we studied in our sample. So this is a cautionary note really to family businesses that in making a switch from, let's say, an aggressive switch from being more traditional, more operationally excellence focused, to being considerably entrepreneurial and innovative without achieving that balance is going to tear at the fabric of the firm and increase its risk of failure.
That's important to note. And just briefly on that before we wrap up soon, the catalyst for a firm to change course can come from different areas. I'm not sure if you studied that in terms of the data, but you've got the internal motivations of, let's say, the board or the ownership wanting to really pivot because they need to. So there's yes. The drive from internal, perhaps there's operational performance issues. And then you have, let's say, the younger generation coming in from their business school or from their millennial perspectives, and really forcing change from within the family, the next generation. And then you also have these larger firms. They would go hire, let's say, Alvarez or Marcel or Bain or McKinsey or something, and they'd have or family office consulting firm, they would have a findings. So just briefly, where do those aggressive pivots come from?
Sure. Well, as mentioned, aggressive pivots can often come from the fact that next generation members, by virtue of being family, typically have decision rights and therefore can act with their own idiosyncratic criteria for what they see as a good opportunity for the business. So this is where resistance is never a bad thing in and of itself. If resistance is simply there to prevent progress and prevent meaningful change, then it's bad. But when resistance acts as a balance to verify whether or not the innovative and entrepreneurial opportunities and ideas, for example, introduced by the next generation, actually sit well with the business. The one thing I would like to couch that is that there can be a tendency for example, for existing generation members to push back against new technological breakthroughs, new innovations. But that, in some recent research, we find that what that does is, yes, it creates conflict, but that conflict can be constructive if it engages in a meaningful conversation about the future direction of the family business, and how, again, acting as a ballast, these things can be balanced out. The issue, though, around that is whether or not the resistance becomes one of a genuine belief that the business is doing better than it really is. And one of our most recent papers that we are studies that we are currently finishing up, one of the things that we've discovered is that those family businesses that are characterized by high emotional attachment, so that is where the family members are deeply emotionally attached to the family business, we found that they often perceive their financial performance to be far greater than it actually truly is when you look at the objective data, you look at the actual financial numbers. So in other words, the more emotionally attached the family members are, the more they believe the business is doing financially better off than it might actually be doing in real life. This is what may create the risk that the family falls into underperformance. And typically when that happens, that activates the lesson from my other study on entropy. What we found is that those firms that are underperforming, that make a large swing towards being entrepreneurial and innovative, are at enormous risk of failure because they haven't got the advantages of success, and they have inbuilt liabilities that they may not even be aware of. And so I think that's two things I would really like to connect together here that are meaningful for family businesses.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, it's been a pleasure today. There's many topics we should address in some other conversations around entrepreneurship within the firm, and governance and compensation and succession planning and organizational behavior. There's lots, but I encourage the listeners to look up Professor Matt Hughes at his university, at the University of Leicester, and also on his LinkedIn. And there's also a Google Scholar page for his papers that are you could spend many hours reading. So it's you produce a good amount of material. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. I would like to express my gratitude to the listeners for joining. We will be editing and re-releasing this in the future, in the coming weeks, here, as well as through Matt as well. And we extend a special thank you, Professor, for joining us and sharing your expertise and wisdom here.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure being part of your audiocast, and I wish you every success with the series, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Again, thank you to all the listeners and for taking part.
That's been terrific. This is R. Adam Smith signing off. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn. Have a great day.